Hello everyone, Waddling Duck here with my first video covering Diablo 4. This video will explain how stat ranges are actually determined, along with how this will impact your hunt for properly itemized endgame gear. And I will also explain why item power is irrelevant for over half of the item slots. There are multiple mechanics in play when determining stat ranges, which at first glance can create bizarre scenarios, such as this item power 777 Ancestral Two-Handed Sword, having 35% critical strike damage, and max range values of 79% for basic skill damage and 84% for overpower damage. Yet a lower power level, 738, Sacred Two-Handed Sword, has 52.5% critical strike damage, and max range values of 118.5% basic skill damage and 126% overpower damage. There can also be odd scenarios, such as these item power 698 gloves that guarantee +3 to skill modifiers, while these item power 801 gloves have a range from 2 to 3 for skill modifiers. From these examples, it is clear that item power alone does not determine stat ranges. In fact, most stat ranges will cap out at item power 725, with any increase past 725 being irrelevant for those stats. Here's a quick preview of how different stats can scale. Nearly every stat follows the yellow line, but there are a few exceptions that continue scaling past item power 725, which I'll cover later in this video. If you look at an item tooltip in the game, you'll see the item power of the item, and once as a single upgrade, it will also show the upgrade level of the item and the bonus item power received from the upgrade. You will also see, next to each stat, the possible value ranges that the stat could have received for that item. The actual stat value received is randomly generated within this range. Worth noting is that the required level of an item is completely irrelevant and does not affect the stats in any way. While the tooltip shows you two useful values, the item power and the upgrade level, over 90% of the possible stats in Diablo 4 have values determined based on the combination of an item tier and the upgrade level, and they do not care about the item power within an item tier whatsoever. There is a small number of stats that will scale solely based on item power, and a few other stats that will scale based on a combination of all three of item power, item tier, and upgrade level. Item tiers are a hidden mechanic based on thresholds of item power. Although there are multiple item tiers in the game, the one worth remembering is the highest and final tier beginning at item power 725. Items that have an item power at or above 725 have significantly higher stat ranges than items at or below 724. The value used to determine the item tier is based on the sum of the base item power and the added item power from upgrade levels. This means that any item with a base item power of at least 700 is capable of reaching the final item tier. For every item in the final tier, which can be any item with the base item power of 700 or higher, the stat ranges are constant regardless of item power, with a few exceptions. Here is a graph showing how the maximum crit chance stat on a ring will scale with item power. Over 90% of all stats in the game follow this pattern. As you can see, a base item power 700 item has the same stats as a base item power 825 item. The item descriptions of Sacred or Ancestral, which start dropping in World Tiers 3 and 4 respectively, do not actually affect the stats of the item at all. These tags simply mean that the item has a higher base item power than it would have had it not dropped as a Sacred or Ancestral item. There is overlap between item power ranges for Sacred and Ancestral items. Sacred items can go as high as at least 718 base item power, while Ancestral items can go as low as at least 685. This means that not all Ancestral items can reach the final item tier. A Sacred item with a base item power of 700 will have the same stat ranges as an Ancestral item with a base item power of 825, meaning that you can find the best in slot endgame items as soon as you start World Tier 3. Here is a real-world example of a base item power 702 ring that has the highest possible stat ranges with high rolls within those ranges, and will be very difficult to improve upon despite it being a Sacred item 123 item power below the top end of Ancestral items. Out of 60 different stats that I tested, 55 of them scale solely with item tier and upgrade level. Here's an example of an amulet with 3 of the tier-based stats across a variety of item powers. As they care only about item tier and upgrade level, you can see that the item power 630 item has identical stat ranges to the item power 704 item. Once the item reaches item power 725 in the final item tier, it has access to the highest stat ranges for these stats, and no increase in item power past 725 will change this. With each upgrade level, the stat ranges do significantly increase. This makes comparing upgraded gear to non-upgraded gear difficult at first glance. However, it is really quite simple and predictable. The stat ranges on upgraded gear will remain consistent per upgrade level across all item powers within an item tier. If the item power 630 amulet and the item power 704 amulet are each upgraded, you can see that it is a uniform increase in the stat ranges on both items. With 0 upgrades, both amulets have a critical chance range from 3 to 7%. With 1 upgrade, they have a critical chance range from 3.3 to 7.7%. And with 2 upgrades, they have a critical chance range from 3.6 to 8.4%, and so forth. The exact value of a roll within the range of possible values is also predetermined for the upgraded ranges without needing to upgrade the item first, as the proportionate value within the value range will stay constant as the range itself increases. For example, let's say you have an item power 738 two-handed sword with 5 upgrade levels that has 82.5% basic skill damage with a range of 55 to 118.5. You then get a new drop with 777 item power and no upgrades, but it shows a basic skill damage of 79% from a range from 37 to 79. And you're wondering, what will that basic skill damage be if you upgrade it 5 times? As both items in this example are in the same item tier, they will both have the exact same range of values once fully upgraded. Thus, you know that the item power 777 item, when upgraded, will have a basic skill damage range from 55.5 to 118.5%. Since the non-upgraded roll for this stat is the perfect roll, it will retain that perfect roll status as the range increases, meaning that you know it will have a value of 118.5 when fully upgraded. You can use this principle to determine the exact value that every stat will have once upgraded, although it is unlikely that you'll be busting out a calculator every time you get a rare drop. Instead, just keep in mind that a near-perfect roll will remain a near-perfect roll, while a bad roll will remain a bad roll. There is one exception to this predictability, and it occurs if you upgrade an item into a higher item tier. On a normal upgrade, the stats are proportionally increased. However, on the specific upgrade that changes the item tier, it will re-roll the values of every stat. This means that rolls can actually go down in value, despite having a higher possible range. Thankfully, it will show exactly how the item will be re-rolled prior to you committing to it, so you can avoid outlier cases and not upgrade into a downgrade. This re-roll does not change which stats are in an item, it merely changes where the numbers fall within their possible range. Here's an example of gloves that became worse as the values are re-rolled as it crosses the 725 item power threshold. Despite the possible value range increasing significantly, the stats are instead lowered significantly as they are given low rolls compared to the prior high rolls. In this way, items in the specific base item power range from 700 to 724 are entirely unpredictable until you actually upgrade them. However, this does give the possibility that you can get an item with the right stats with low rolls and upgrade all of them into the same stats with high rolls. Plus skill modifiers are also not affected by item power and are only affected by item tier and upgrade level. Here, you can see gloves with 3 upgrade levels rapidly increasing from plus 2 skill up to a range of 2 to 4 and then 3 to 4 in the span of only a 10 item power difference. For non-amulet skill modifiers, the highest item tier will have a range of 2 to 3 plus skills for upgrades 0, 1, 2, and 3, a range of 2 to 4 for upgrade level 4, and a range of 3 to 4 for upgrade level 5. For amulet skill modifiers, it will have a range of 1 to 2 for upgrades 0 through 4, and then increase to a range of 1 to 3 at upgrade level 5. Given that the plus skill modifiers are only increased on the 4th or 5th upgrade levels, it will save you some resources if you understand how the actual roll will be affected by upgrades. For non-amulet skill modifiers, if you have a roll of plus 2 at upgrade 0, it will become plus 3 at upgrade level 5, and can never reach plus 4. If you have a roll of plus 3 at upgrade level 0, it will become plus 4 at upgrade levels 4 and 5. For amulets, a roll of plus 1 at 0 upgrades will remain at plus 1 even at max upgrades. However, an amulet with a roll of plus 2 at no upgrades will become plus 3 at 5 upgrades. While most stats stop scaling at item power 725, there are a few exceptions. The biggest and most obvious ones are the inherent stats on items, damage values of the weapons, armor values on armor, and resistances on jewelry. These stats do not care about item tiers or upgrade levels, but instead scale directly with item power all the way to the maximum item power values. Weapon damage increases about 4% per 10 item power. Chest armors receive 2 armor per item power, helms receive 1.25 armor per item power, pants receive 1 armor per item power, and both gloves and boots will receive half an armor point per item power. The resistances found on amulets and rings do scale with item power, however they do so very slowly. This upgraded item power 839 amulet has 26.5% resist all, while this upgraded item power 729 amulet has 24.8% resist all. Now, we finally get to the 5 non-inherent stats that do scale with item power. They are maximum life, life on kill, life regeneration while not damaged recently, thorns, and lucky hit up to a % chance to heal. Here's an example of a ring with 3 of the 5 scaling values, across a variety of item powers and 3 different item tiers. You can see the range is gradually increasing as the item power increases, with massive increases as they enter new item tiers at item powers 625 and 725. Yet upgrade level still remains relevant on these items as well, as you can see a 660 plus 10 ring having higher values than a base 672 ring. These stats will continue to scale all the way to the maximum item power. There are a few practical takeaways to understanding how these stats are all determined. First, anything with an item power of 699 or lower is not going to be endgame worthy. Any non-weapon with a base item power of 700 or higher can be endgame worthy, regardless of whether it is sacred or ancestral. Jewelry, in particular, has exceptionally small differences in their scaling resists, and are prime candidates for using these lower item power versions. Looking at a graph comparing the different stat scalings, jewelry follows the orange line for their implicit stats and the yellow line for almost every other stat. If your amulet and both rings are all base item power 700 rather than 825, it will only cost you a total of 1.8% to all resists and 2.2% to 4 individual resists. The only scaling stats that can appear on jewelry are maximum life or life regeneration on rings, and thorns on amulets. Gloves and boots scale their armor stat very poorly and follow the light blue line at the bottom for their armor, so they are also good candidates for using a lower item power version. Boots cannot receive any scaling stats, while the only scaling stat available to gloves is the lucky hit chance to heal. This means that boots and gloves will follow the light blue line for armor and the yellow line for everything else. Using a base item power 700 item for boots or gloves instead of an 825 item power item will only cost you 62 armor each. Accordingly, 5 of the 8 non-weapon item slots can be filled with base item power 700 gear with no meaningful difference compared to base item power 825 gear. Chest armor, helms, and pants will each scale armor at a more significant rate, and it is unlikely that you would want to use lower item power versions of these. These slots are also each capable of having the maximum life stat, which you can see scales incredibly well into higher item powers, going up 60% between item powers 700 and 825. Life on kill is available on the helm, which scales even faster, going up over 150% between item powers 700 and 825. Weapon damage follows the green line and will increase by over 50% going from 700 to 825 item power, and for that reason alone, you will never want to stick with a lower item power weapon. There are a vast number of stats in this game, and I did not test every single one, but here are the ones that I did test. There may be additional outliers that scale with item power, such as class-specific stats, but now that you know how these mechanics work, it should be easy enough for you to check one for yourself. If you do find another, please leave a comment to let me know. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video helped you understand how stat values are determined on gear. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like and subscribe.